The applause was so loud. It was almost like a standing ovation. And I thought, wow, I'm definitely going to get more than 1% of the vote this time. But even I did not know that I was going to win. That was a surprise to me, too.
Thee Quaker Podcast.
Story, spirit, sound.
I'm Georgia Sparling, and this is our penultimate episode for Season 2. Next week, we'll talk a little bit more about what will happen in the off-season. But today is the second in our two-part series on Quakers and politics. If you missed last week's episode, please go back and download that one. We explored the implications of a Quaker government from a historical standpoint, and then we turned to what's happening now. And we heard from two friends who shared strategies, wisdom, and tools for engaging in the midst of this tense political environment that we're in. I think it's one of our most important episodes of the season, so I really don't want you to miss it. Today, though, we're going to continue that theme, and we're going to look at one particular Quaker who entered the political sphere. And I want to ask you a question. Well, a few questions, actually. Would you ever run for president? Or maybe prime minister where you are, or really just any major political office? What would you base your campaign on? How much would your public life be influenced by your Quaker faith? Well, today's guest is a Quaker who actually ran for president. And no, this is not one of our history episodes. This is actually modern day. Jason Palmer, a Quaker businessman, ran for president for this election. And he actually, against the odds, beat President Joe Biden in one particular primary. So, I could not pass up the chance to learn more about this guy who put his name in the hat to challenge an incumbent and who made news while doing it. So, who is this Jason Palmer? Let's find out. Jason Palmer had his first brush with the U.S. presidency when, as a kid, he wrote a letter to President Ronald Reagan and then got one back.
For a long time, I was going around telling people, I have the president's signature. He wrote back to me, not realizing that it was like all these interns working in the White House responding to all these letters.
Jason continued to follow the goings-on in the White House and contemplated his own foray into politics. But it didn't happen until he got fed up with the impending election. You know the one I'm talking about.
I decided to run for president a little bit on a whim. I always thought eventually I would get into politics. But years went by, decades went by, and suddenly I woke up and found I was 52 years old. And I was watching the Republican debate, and it was just a scream fest. There was no civility. I turned it off, and I said, this is just embarrassing for our country.
This was about a year ago.
Joe Biden said he was going to be a transitional figure. Nobody had thrown their hat in the race. And I said, you know what? Let me ask a couple of my CEOs. Should I run for president? And the first two I said this to, they're like, you mean president of the United States? Are you crazy? And I said, yes, I'm merely being president of the United States. Somebody needs to run. So I went online. It was like, how do you get registered in New Hampshire? How do you get registered in Nevada? I was like, how tough can it be? I figured out it was really tough.
It was relatively easy to get on the ballot in Nevada. He needed 12 people to sign a petition. He had 15 LinkedIn contacts in the state. So he arranged a dinner, they discussed politics, and he asked them if he should run.
Everybody said, absolutely, you should definitely run. And then I was like, oh, wow, this is, I guess I'm doing this.
Jason made a video to announce his candidacy, and he made it internet official in November 2023.
America needs an upgrade. We started with a beautiful vision for what we could be. Freedom, opportunity, equality, justice for all. But I think we all know something's not working, and we can't find answers in the past.
Jason says the video quickly amassed 20,000 views and hundreds of comments on LinkedIn, and has more than 300,000 views on YouTube. Now he had a little buzz, so he started to build a campaign. It was a learning process.
I hired a couple people to be my staff, to actually fill out the paperwork, get me on the ballots in all these states. And our goal was originally to get on 40 state ballots. In the end, we only got on 16.
Now, was Jason Palmer ever going to win the 2024 presidential election? I mean, no. It was a long shot of long shots. And he wasn't the only one surprised when he won 6 delegates on Super Tuesday in the territory of American Samoa. CNN was also surprised. Here's a clip with Abby Phillip and Harry Enton.
Well, Joe Biden swept Super Tuesday, almost. American Samoa's 6 delegates will actually go to another candidate, and he's someone that I guarantee you most Americans have not heard of before tonight. His name is Jason Palmer.
You look at the board, you look at the map, you got Joe Biden blue all over the place, except right down here, these little dots, American Samoa. I want you to look at the vote tally here. 51 to 40. Not very much, that's 11 ahead, but hey, that will work. Now here's the thing that's...
Who is this guy who decided to try the impossible and run for the president of the United States of America as a virtually unknown entrepreneur with no political experience?
I was born in Aberdeen, Maryland, if you really want to go back to the very beginning. And my father was a golfer and my mother was a Methodist. We ended up moving to Poughkeepsie, New York. And my best friend down the street was a boy the same age as me named David Kaiser. And we would always play together. We played street ball together. We hung out together. We collected baseball cards together. And he was Quaker. I didn't know anything about Quakerism until I went to what I considered summer camp with him, which was a place called New York Yearly Meeting. And over time of attending this summer camp and going to a place called Pal House with my best friend David, I eventually realized, you know what, this religion speaks to me more than my dad's golf or my mom's Methodism. The main thing that drew me to Quakers is how much they truly love every person as an equal. And they were welcoming of me, and I saw them be welcoming of lots of other people, regardless of their circumstances. And that won me over.
Jason has attended silent meetings for worship since he was a kid, and he continued into his adulthood, going to meetings in Brooklyn, Baltimore, and Chatham, New York. He said he was always kind of a fidgety kid and is now a fidgety adult.
And so it was difficult. But, you know, there's a reason why now people are downloading all these apps like Calm and Meditate, and meditation is increasing. There's something about Quakerism that is kind of a little bit like meditation in communion with the Spirit that has appealed to me over time and become part of my life.
While Jason found a spiritual path early on, it wasn't until he was in college at the University of Virginia that he discovered his acumen for business.
My parents didn't have enough money to send me to the University of Virginia. I was an out-of-state student. So my dad and I worked out an arrangement where he would give me $7,000 a year, was all that they could afford. I got a little bit of money from a track scholarship. I worked as an RA in the dorms. I worked as a waiter nights and weekends to pay my way through college. And then I invented these little businesses. I started a meal plan so that students could eat at all the restaurants around campus instead of at the cafeteria. And that was called the Corner Meal Plan. And that ended up running for about 20 years after I started it in 1993 and became kind of the largest off-campus meal plan in the country.
The university meal plan was a couple of $1,000s, and he says the cafeteria food was terrible. Yet walking distance from campus were dozens of restaurants. And as a waiter at some of those restaurants, he already had an in. So Jason started talking to the owners, and he came up with an alternative meal plan for students that was at a reasonable price and with much better food than they were getting on campus. The idea took off.
The second year, I remember going to the mailbox, and the woman behind the counter just like, "You're not going to believe it. You're rich. You got to come back here." And there were so many envelopes sticking out in every which direction. She's like, "I can't even put any more envelopes in there." And that day I deposited about $200,000 into the account. And then by the end, when I sold it, actually was a whole $1 million a year in meal plans.
After graduation, Jason headed to California. There, he became a co-founder of a company that helps students get their first jobs after college. He and his fellow founders raised $9 million and sold the business for $11 million. Then he went back east to attend Harvard Business School.
Since then, I've started 4 companies, invested in maybe 30 companies, and I do something called impact investing, where it's like venture capital, but we're investing in mission-driven companies.
Now, let's get back to Jason's run for president. He says his campaign was based on his understanding of Quaker leadership, guided in part by the childhood friend who first introduced him to the Religious Society of Friends. So here are his 3 pillars.
Number 1 was conscious capitalism, that there is this way to turn capitalism into a driver for equity across our society, and it can lift up all boats, but it won't work if we keep doing capitalism the old way. There's very particular ways we need to reform the system, change the system to make it equitable for everyone. And the power of capitalism to lift people up. And so a lot of times people have difficulty understanding my politics because I'm very strongly progressive, but I'm also very strongly in favor of freedom to help advance your economic lot in life.
Jason attributes this social justice bent in part to his early influences. From his dad, he learned about injustices such as apartheid in South Africa. And from his Quaker friend's dad, he learned about prisons and the juvenile detention system.
Now I invest in a company that actually does education in prisons and jails, and I know it is directly related to knowing that my best friend Dave's dad worked in prisons and jails, helping to educate people.
Back to the campaign pillars.
The second is that as an investor, I see that the whole world is changing to this new collar economy, is what I call it. And the new collar economy is where you can get certified in Google Analytics, Amazon Web Services, digital marketing, digital podcasting. You can learn these digital hybrid skills. And within 1 year of kind of learning plus apprenticeship, you can get upskilled to a middle-class job and you don't even need to go to college. And I've been investing in these certification and certificate programs, credential programs now for almost a decade. And I wanted to bring that thinking to the country as well. And then the third is about modernizing government. Our government, even when they grade themselves, they're getting C's and D's and F's in terms of their efficiency and becoming modern, using modern technology. We need to bring a whole modernization approach to how we manage government.
Jason says the establishment of benefit corporations, also known as B corporations, would change communities. In comparison to more traditional C corporations, whose stakeholders are owners, stockholders, etc., B corporations are more mission-driven and more conscious of environmental and social needs, as well as having more transparent business practices. Right now, they account for maybe 1 or 2% of businesses in the U.S., and that's something that Jason would like to see changed if he were ever elected president.
And I would actually have it be taxed differently. You can still be an all-about-profit corporation. If you are, you pay 25% tax rate on your profits. Or you could be a public benefit corporation and have this multiple stakeholder approach, and you would only pay 15% tax rate. I know how corporate America works. Every company in America would be trying to figure out, how do I get to become a benefit corporation so that I can pay the lower tax rate? And then every company in America would be focused on a more equitable society, better rules and regulations for their employees, better benefits, better customer service, better focus on the environment and the community. And I do think, honestly, that's the number 1 pillar of my campaign. And that's the number 1 thing we need to do to heal and make our society equitable.
Running for president is obviously not something to take lightly. It's expensive, it's a lot of work, and the incumbent almost always wins. So I wanted to understand Jason's approach from a spiritual standpoint.
Well, a lot of Quakers are believers in living a life of simplicity or simple things. And so I have kind of, I would say like a radical Marie Kondo kind of feng shui-ness that I've tried to make part of my life. And that I make part of every part of my, interactions, appreciating the little things, appreciating a person, no matter how much someone might perceive them as a little person, making sure that my team is very diverse in terms of viewpoint and also in terms of background and religion.
This candidacy begs the question, how can a Quaker even be president? Is there a conflict of interest between the peace testimony and being head of one of the largest militaries in the world, especially as America gives millions of dollars to provide weapons in 2 wars?
Well, I think that's a good lead into the fact that I now consider myself Quaker-ish. So even though, Quakerism, I would always check the box that I am Quaker, I'm a member of the Religious Society of Friends. I do see, and in fact, was a very early advocate coming out for peace in Palestine, for a ceasefire, for an exchange of hostages. I think even there can be a peace in Ukraine with Russia, and I would push for that as well. But you also have to be realistic that when attacked, you need a strong defense. But it should be always about defense, never about offensive warfare. And so there is a way that I consider Quakerish to always be focused on how can we quickly get to peace with the least loss of life possible. But you also do need to defend yourself. And so that's why I do think in this particular case, I'm more Quaker-ish than, straight Quaker. Because I do think straight Quakers, have done incredible things, the peaceful, nonviolent resistance, and I do strongly believe in those, but I do think there is some point in which you have to defend yourself.
All right, so where are we? We've got an unlikely candidate. He's Quaker/Quaker-ish. He's on some ballots. He's gotten some buzz. He's got ideas. He's got ideals. And pretty soon, he's going to have a win that nobody saw coming. That's after the break. So hello, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for coming on. Glad we could coordinate.
Absolutely.
And you're a teacher, is that right?
I am. Yeah, I teach middle school. Mm-hmm.
Bless you.
That's everybody's response.
This is Dan Consiglio, a member of Lansdowne Friends Meeting in Pennsylvania. Dan first encountered Quakers at Swarthmore College about 25 years ago when he and his now wife were students. That was where he attended his first meeting at Swarthmore Friends.
So it's unprogrammed. They didn't give a query. It was just like people came in, sat down, some folks smiled at me, and I sat there for about 10 minutes. I was like, oh, wow, this is real. Like, we are actually going to sit here in silence for an hour. The messages themselves didn't really speak to me, but it was, I think, the idea that, like, Quakers, we didn't get rid of the clergy, we got rid of the laity. So it's like everybody gets to stand up and talk. And I think like just that felt really empowering to me.
Years later, when Dan and his wife were interested in providing a spiritual background for their young kids, they decided to look into the school at Lansdowne Friends Meeting.
I think just that the people that we met there were just wonderful people who like said all the right things and, were really very caring and asked a lot of interesting questions. And so we're like, oh, well, there's a meeting connected there. Let's try this meeting out. And similarly, walked in and just like were welcomed by so many people.
Within a year, they were fully involved and had even joined committees.
I think the thing that's always drawn me spiritually to Quakerism is just that every time I walk out of a meeting, I'm still in worship mode. Like, I feel like you never really kind of leave worshipful practice as a Quaker. Just this idea that like I'm not really off the hook. Like I have to, like if I believe a thing, I have to act on the thing. That's really brought me a lot of satisfaction in my life that I'm not sure that I had before. And I think it's made my relationships, even with like my non-Quaker friends, like I think closer and like I'm more able to, I guess, open up emotionally and like have conversations with people that are, a little more, I guess, spiritually and politically brave, if that makes sense.
Dan is one of our new podcast supporters, and I asked him why it's important to have and support Quaker media.
I mean, one of the cool things actually I really appreciated, like I've never heard a message from a programmed meeting before. That was just really neat exposure. I mean, I knew that Quaker practice was different outside of this area, and even across the country. Like there are lots of programmed Quakers in the United States of America. A lot of that really helped me understand, like, oh yeah, like they're still Quaker. Like it's a little different. Like they worship a little differently, but it at the core, it's still the same thing. I mean, through your shows, the only exposure I ever had to that, so that was really cool.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that.
What made you decide to become the Quaker Podcast's monthly supporter?
I think that the work you all are doing is super important. Podcasts, I think, have a really powerful ability to reach out to folks who maybe feel isolated and show them that they're not isolated. And, there is a larger community that's happy to welcome them. And I think you guys are doing some really great work to bring that to more people. And I think make that a more, I guess, enriched conversation. The deep stuff is what you guys are doing, and that's really awesome. And I can contribute financially, so I'm going to.
We're so thankful for Dan and the many of you who have recently signed up to become podcast supporters. We know that not everyone can give, but if you're able, please consider it. We really feel that it does fill a need, just as Dan said, to help bring connection to those who feel isolated, to those who are looking for like-minded people, to those who are looking for stories that will really resonate with them. So if you're able to give, head over to QuakerPodcast.com. It only takes a couple of minutes, and we're so grateful for you. We first heard about Jason Palmer when news outlets picked up on an unexpected victory over Biden back in March. NPR's headline read, "Jason Palmer beats Biden in American Samoa and looks to Northern Mariana Islands." Democrats in American Samoa, a territory of the United States, had voted 51-40 in favor of a little-known Quaker businessman.
American Samoa is how you actually pronounce it.
Good to know. So how did this even happen?
So everybody assumes that I moved to American Samoa and I invited all my best friends to the caucus, but that's not actually what happened. I have never visited American Samoa.
Jason had observed that other candidates who were making headway had hired local staff, so he did the same. 2020 Democratic candidate Michael Bloomberg had also won in Samoa. Now, just to clarify, Samoans can vote in the primaries, but their territory status means they can't vote in the election. Still, they do have delegates.
When you're learning about elections, you learn every vote counts and you need to talk to each person individually. And so I said, you know what? Almost every person I talk to ends up voting for me. And this is a place where maybe I could get lucky and talk to everybody. There's only going to be 200 or 300 people who are going to vote here. So we hired 3 people locally on the island. Now, Michael Bloomberg spent millions of dollars to win American Samoa. I only spent $5,000 on my employees and $5,000 on advertising. But we hired 3 people. They made lots of local signs, hand-drawn signs. We hosted a beach cleanup. We did 3 Zoom town halls. We even did a session with some school children in the school. And then they allowed me to speak for a couple of minutes at the caucus when they had their caucus. And I kind of knew that something was up just leading into the election because I was getting text messages every day of a new American Samoan who had handmade a sign. But it was a handmade billboard. I said, oh my gosh, these people really love the message. I made a 6-minute video that was all about how I learned the language in American Samoa, as much as you can in 3 weeks.
Talofa lava. I'm Jason Palmer, Democratic candidate for President of the United States. This coming Tuesday, March 5th, you will choose who you think is the best candidate for the November general election. I'm asking for your support and vote and would love to talk to you about why I believe I'm the best candidate for American Samoa.
Jason came up with policies specifically for American Samoa, including a second hospital and an easier pathway to citizenship. After speaking at the caucus on Super Tuesday, he said,
the applause was so loud. It was almost like a standing ovation. And I thought, wow, I'm definitely going to get more than 1% of the vote this time. But even I did not know that I was going to win. That was a surprise to me, too.
Anticipating a loss, he'd planned to end his campaign on Super Tuesday.
I was flat out exhausted. I'd been traveling to Colorado, Vermont, doing all these Zoom town halls. I did a Zoom town hall in American Samoa at 2 a.m. And then we won American Samoa and the phone went crazy. And all of a sudden I was being offered chances to be interviewed on CNN, Fox, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post. I stayed up until 3 a.m. doing interviews.
Jason also had another motive in mind. Knowing his candidacy had to end at some point, he and his team had planned to pivot to a new organization called Together. That's with an exclamation point.
And we made it kind of a spot decision. You know what? Let's pivot to Together right now. Let's not take a month off and kind of recover. Like, this is our opportunity.
During an interview with CNN after the primary, he announced the new initiative.
It's something that had been in the works for a couple months, but we rolled it out early. And so ever since then, I've been working to try to get 20 young people elected to Congress and 1 million young people registered to vote. We're doing partnerships all across the country. We're raising money from all quarters. Actually, most of our donations are coming in small donations of like $10, $25, $100 from people who believe we do need to have national unity in our politics. We do need to work together across the aisle. We have to reduce the polarization. And most importantly, we have to start electing young people who really represent the next generation. The average age of people in Congress is 59 years old, and that is too old. We need people who are in their 20s, 30s, maybe even early 40s. That'll bring down the average too. And so that's what we've been doing ever since.
Jason also joined a chorus of people calling for Biden to withdraw from the presidential campaign, which had not yet happened when we spoke back in July. He advocated for a mini primary in which the Democratic convention could choose from a few candidates, including Kamala Harris. So a lot has happened since I spoke with Jason in July, but back then I asked him if he was hopeful about the election.
I am an optimistic person, so I am hopeful but vigilant is how I would express it. I think hope alone is not a strategy. If we don't get engaged, you don't vote, and you don't volunteer your time, then you will get an outcome that you don't want. If you want to affect the outcome, this election, more than any other, is one where you should lean in, get involved, and use every ounce of organizing power that you have to help influence the election. And that's a big part of why I ran, is I thought my voice can help change things here in this country. We can set a positive, optimistic vision for the future. And I believe in the values of the Democratic Party, and I believe in the values of democracy, human rights, an open and tolerant society. And so I'll be supporting the candidate who most embodies those values.
But would he ever run for president again?
I've thought about it, and the decision I've made for today is I'm going to wait 2 years to decide about that question. I think it's really important that I take a break after November 5th and focus on, recuperation, recovery, earning a living again. But in 2 years' time, I will see where we're at as a country, see where we're at as a Democratic Party, and then make my decision. I used to think it was kind of, why would politicians just not say yes or no? But, now knowing how much work it is, all the fundraising, all the speech giving, all the work, you don't take this lightly. You really have to make sure it's a decision you want to make for 1 or 2 years of your life. And that's a big decision. So I'm going to wait 2 years and then I'll decide.
It's wild to me that anyone would ever run for a major public office. It just brings up so many questions of conscience and character. So it was fascinating to hear how Jason's Quakerly convictions translated into his run for presidency. I mean, our last Quaker-ish president was Richard Nixon, and to put it lightly, he made some pretty bad decisions. But even though I'm not going to run for president, A lot of the same questions of conscience and character come up for me when it comes to voting. I hate that I have to hold my nose and vote. And I wonder, is that just really a part of the human condition? Can I be more hopeful like Jason Palmer? I don't know. But I do know I can do something right in my own area. And this weekend, for me personally, it's spending a few hours helping to protect the waterways down here that I love so much. So wherever you are, let's take some chutzpah from Jason Palmer and consider what we can do to heal the things that we see around us that are broken. We probably won't be 100% successful like Jason Palmer's first presidential bid, but even a Samoa-sized win could begin to turn the tide. We never know. Thank you for listening, and thank you to Jason Palmer for being our guest on this episode. If you'd like to learn more about his new initiative, Together, visit togetherpurple.org. We'll have that link and more on the episode page at QuakerPodcast.com. We've also got discussion questions and a transcript of this episode. And while you're there, please leave us a comment and let us know what you think about a Quaker in the White House in the 21st century. Could it ever happen? Could it ever work? Give us your thoughts. This episode was reported and produced by me, Georgia Sparling. Jon Watts wrote and performed the music. Studio D mixed the episode, and your moment of Quaker Zen will be read by Grace Gonklewski. If you've been holding off on becoming a monthly supporter of the Quaker Podcast, why not consider it now? You can begin giving at just $5 a month, and it only takes about 5 minutes to sign up. Just head to QuakerPodcast.com and click support at the top of the page. And now for your moment of Quaker Zen.
Douglas Steer, 1986. Quakers entered the service of silent waiting, not alone or in a series of separate reveries, but in a company of worshipers. They know something of the needs of their fellow worshipers. They know something of the sufferings and needs of the world. Often, they are conscious of a whole redemptive company of faithful departed ones who are engaged in this all-embracing struggle as well. This realization and these needs are gently brought into the worship in the form of intercession, of brothering the souls of others.
Sign up for daily or weekly Quaker wisdom to accompany you on your spiritual path. Just go to dailyquaker.com. That's dailyquaker.com.